Hello and howdy, everyone. Welcome to another Angular Air. Hope you're all having fantastic Friday, whether it's morning or afternoon or evening for you. So excited to be here. My name is Alyssa Nichol, and with me today as a panelist down below, we have Justin Schwarzenberger, aka Shorty. How are you doing, Justin?
Hey, I'm doing fine. How are you?
Doing good, man. Doing good. I'm ready to just chill. I told Jordan this earlier. Oops, I spilled the beans on who our guest is. I was like, I'm just ready to chill with you, man. This has been a morning. So this is gonna be good. It's gonna be a calming coding session. Cause I don't know about you guys, but that's what my happy place.
Yeah, yeah. I had a
So,
rough morning. Fixed some stuff, but it was challenging. Faced some Angular things, so
yes.
looking forward to this.
So our guest of honor, as I spoiled earlier, is Jordan Powell. How are you, darling? How you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. This is I gotta say, I've been on a lot of English shows, but this is like the one at the top of the list that I've never been invited to, and I've always been kind of like, what the heck? But
yeah,
I finally made the cut after like episode 3000. So thank you guys.
It's your homegirl absolutely not being with it. So that's my bad, Jordan.
It's all good. It's all good. I've just been saving hot takes for this for a long time. So.
Hi, chat. It's good to see you all rolling in. Please post your questions, comments. I will take dad jokes or parental puns as well today. Those are being accepted for live viewing. But yes, Jordan, for those in the community who are new, we have a lot of new people, especially with the influx of the Renaissance and all the features coming in. Could you introduce yourself, a little bit about you, what you do?
Yeah, sure. I'm Jordan Powell. I live in the wonderful state that's very cold right now of Ohio. I used to actually work with Shorty, but I have worked for the last almost 3 years now at Cypress. Been a part of just about every team we have at Cypress. And probably the thing I'm going to talk about today is the thing that I've most people will recognize, I guess, me from this work, but helped to build component testing and specifically the Angular part of component testing for those of you who have used it. So yeah, I'm one of the 10 people that are passionate about testing. So excited to talk to y'all. So
I'm going to rapid fire these because your introduction spurred 3 questions.
Uh-oh.
1, do you have snow right now? What's Ohio like? 2,
it's actually 40 degrees out, which is this is
horrible.
Put on your cargo shorts because it's, it was 0 last week. So
40 Fahrenheit to Celsius because we've got it's 4.
That's
4
no,
degrees.
I've learned this. You know how you calculate this?
Oh no, is
roughly.
It the 30 minus 32? What is the
Take the number, so 4 and double it. Okay, so that's 8, and then you add 32. So that's roughly 40 degrees.
Wait, but does it work the other way?
It does, but you have to do the equation backwards.
Yeah.
You gotta subtract 32, then half it.
Divide it by 2. Yeah, there you go.
Question number 2: was it at where Justin's currently at, or a different company when you guys work together?
SiriusXM. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then question number 3: every team, including design and QA, or just every dev team? What?
Oh, this is a loaded question.
I didn't know.
Well, no, it's okay. Most of the teams I've been a part of implode, and so we actually just restructured again. So I'm on a new team, and so I apologize. I'm I take full responsibility for this.
At some point during your life, when
they're gonna be I don't want that guy on my team anymore.
When chaos and catastrophe happen, at some point you look in the mirror and you say, "Is it me?"
We can take a positive spin. We can take a positive spin and say, "Hey, look, if you want to blow your team up, just bring them in if you need a way." Right?
I'm very resilient. I will say that. I've learned this. So
excellent. Nice. I was impressed at the mad skills it takes to be on every team. I was like, there are some teams I do not even want to try to do their job. So, so component testing. A little bit of a scary topic, at least for Alyssa. Testing, it's just a lot of anxiety ridden. Justin, he could test, I think, anything in his sleep in any language. So I don't think that's.
I'm ready.
He's ready. But yeah, tell us more. Tell us more about component testing. And you said that you were on the ground floor of the writing and the doings.
Yeah. So kind of to like peel back the onion a bit, when I first joined Cypress, they're already basically pretty well along on building component testing. But they were only adding support for React and Vue mostly because people at Cypress, there was almost no one who had worked in Angular ecosystem before. And so I was like, hey, what the heck? Like, you forget about my people. And, eventually they're like, well, that's the thing we're going to do after we release this. And eventually I was just like, let me see if I could just build this thing and add support for it, and build a couple prototypes. And then eventually they're like, well, why don't you just join our team? So then I joined their team and we released component testing, and now it's it's very successful in terms of like how well it's adopted. But between other frameworks, like they're blown away. They're like, wow, people actually really like this thing. I'm like, I tried to tell you, Angular people are great. So
and not scary at all. I wouldn't
scary. No.
I wouldn't say no. Question in the chat is waiting to see the best practice. It's coming. I know he has the best practices, or at least a couple. But what were you going to say, Shorty? Sorry.
So can we kind of explain what component testing is versus maybe like regular Cypress testing?
Yeah. No, so in all seriousness, the thing that I love about the idea is like end-to-end testing is always going to be really going to be the most bang for your buck in terms of testing. Like, it's the way your users use your application, they're testing in the browser, and that's what makes like browser-based end-to-end testing really valuable. The problem is like it also comes at a trade-off in that it's not as performant, because if you want to test one little specific thing, you have to load the entire browser, all the assets and so forth. And so like the way you initiate a normal like end-to-end test is you basically do site.visit and you visit the URL, and then it will basically, Cypress will navigate to that URL, and you can then begin using the API to interact with the page and so forth. But with component testing, we know there's like a big gap. What we noticed was between like end-to-end testing and then like people's writing all these unit tests, and there was a huge gap between there. And then if we took a step back, we're like, it's weird because we like most of our front end frameworks are components, right? Like 90% of what we do is we're building components, and maybe we have services or stores or hooks or whatever framework you're using that integrate with it. But at the end of the day, like the components are the building blocks of our applications, and we never really thought there was a real ergonomically good way to test components. We would try unit tests, or we'd lean on end-to-end tests, but there's kind of a big gap in the middle. And so the concept of a component test is I want to leverage the same power of loading, visiting my website in a browser and interacting with it the way a user does. But instead of loading the entire website, I just want to take that specific component and just mount that into the browser, and I can interact with it the way I would, but I'm not having to spin up a server or anything like that. And the other, so that's like the main difference. But then the other benefit you get is like, you're not having to, with a unit test, mock out all these things, like mock out your services, mock out all this configuration just to test some little thing, right? Because, but with component testing is you're actually using the runtime environment of your app. So you don't have to mock out your store or your service or anything like that. You just use the actual service or store, and it just works. It's like easy and simple. And that's what I love about it, right? Because no one likes to test, right? Like, so it's like, besides Justin and me, like everyone else hates it. So it's like, we got to make it as simple as possible for the Alyssas of the world. So.
There are many. I'm not alone. Yes. Tell me when you want to show off some codes, because I can plop it up. But I have a question as far as, does component testing lie underneath one of the other branches? So like it is a small piece of end to end, or it is a small, like is it classified, or is it just like its own?
Yeah. It'll probably be best to show you if that makes sense. So let me So here's a project that I have open. And so when you launch Cypress now, it used to just open end-to-end testing, but now you're basically greeted with this window that's like, hey, do you want to do end-to-end testing? And end-to-end testing would basically, it's like completely agnostic. It doesn't have any concept of what framework you're using or anything like that. It could live completely separate place as your application, where component testing would live you could configure it in some wonky way, but like the goal is like, how people do weird stuff. But at the end of the day, like it's going to be in the same like root of your Angular application, and it's going to then use basically under the covers. It takes your Angular.json file, and then it will basically use the Angular compiler to get the Webpack config, and then we consume that, and then you're getting all the magic of Angular, and we use testbed under the cover, so you still have all access to all the like testbed things you would like, but we're actually serving it using your run, not like a test environment, but your actual production environment, which I think is really important. So the nice thing is, like I said, this is how you again, here's some empty tests that we can write, but the idea is like, this is how you would write it. This is how you would get started with component testing. That makes sense. I do have just a super basic stepper component, right? You click the thing, but the nice thing is, like, writing a test is super easy. So you just do this, you mount stepper component, and that's it. And you'll now see it, but let me dot only this because we don't want the other test to run. And so now you can get this like directly in the browser, and you can actually like click on it and it runs, and you can like interact with it like it's like running it in an application, which is really awesome. You can inspect this and look at all this stuff. You can make style changes. So what I found is like even in Cypress, when we're building other things or Cypress itself, we use component testing to dog food our own code, but we use it as a way to TDD our actual building of our thing. So think of this as less like I'm writing tests, but more like this is almost kind of like gives you the storybook type thing where you're seeing what the component looks like, and then you can basically write tests for all the different states that your component would essentially do, that sort of thing. So yeah, does this give a little bit more insight into, again, this is super ugly, no styles, anything like this, but if I were to add styles, they would show up in here and all the magic. So
no, absolutely. No, it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, so it's basically giving you this opportunity to run your component in isolation. So not having to see it in the app, you can run it. And like you mentioned, just like in Storybook, and Storybook does the same sort of thing where it uses your Angular, configuration and things to essentially serve up an app with nothing on it but your component, right?
Yeah,
and so
absolutely.
When you side mount, you are basically that's just like, hey, this is the component I want to render.
It's basically saying like, I want to run ng serve, but instead of like visiting a route, I basically want to take just this component and run serve against it, and then I just see this inside of Cypress. So yeah, that's what I think is really powerful about this. Is it's you're not you kind of not doing the trade-offs of like, I want to serve the entire application, so because I want to see what it's actually going to do, but I don't want but I still want to write tests. So with unit tests, you're just getting like a green dot, and it's not super. I mean, the I don't know, the value or the noise that you're getting from that is not super clear, but this, I feel like, is just as much a clear indicator of what's actually happening. The other thing I would say is, Justin, we've worked on projects like this where the application is super stateful and you have to go through like a flow to get to something. So if you're assigned a ticket that's on like the checkout page or flow, and you got to go through, you're like spend all your day going like entering junk information to get to the fourth page so you can style something or change some validation. So you could either write an end-to-end test that goes through this entire flow, but even at that, it's going to take a minute to run that and to write the test, where this is like, I just want to test this counter component in the way it's going to work. And so you can just mount this specifically. So
And if
that's
you have
really
like
viable.
gone all the way the ant design route and like your button is a component and this is using 3 of those, like I'm assuming it's totally fine to like test multiple components together, but do they have to be like in the same, like in one mama component in order to write a test for it? Or can you like be like, I want to test our grid in alignment with our Excel functionality or something, right? Like,
Yeah, no. So for example, this app is just an app component that has a stepper component inside of it, but we could basically instead mount this app component and it'll do the same thing. So this is like, you could mount the very parent component of your application, or you could scope it as narrow as you want.
okay.
So though it looks the same because, there's the application, that actual app component is technically just, it's a child of the stepper component, is a child of the app. But yeah, you could be as specific or as broad as you want, which is also really cool too.
Could you mount 2 components?
So
So that you didn't really, like, if you didn't have a composite component, that to test it, but you really did want to test interaction between 2 components.
The power.
Could you do that?
Yeah, so you could do something like class, like wrapper component or something like this. You could put all your, component stuff from Angular, and you need like a selector.
You just like mock one up real quick, basically.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
have one component to mount, but it's
And
including
then you would be like, you'd have to put your HTML or the template.
Yeah.
And then you would just do like, hey, app or app dash stepper, and then like, whatever else thing here. And then instead of wrapping app component, you would just do wrapper component. Yeah, exactly. The other cool thing is it's a little harder in Angular just because of the way actual components work. But if this, like in React, is you literally just do JSX. So you would do like
inline that template,
like
right?
stepper, like this, or you could do like stepper and then my button or something like this. Like you just do JSX and it mounts it. So and React, it's even easier, but if you're using, or Vue or something with JSX, but Angular's a little bit more opinionated for good and for bad. So yeah, but yeah, it could be done either way. So
nice. So I want to touch just really quick on you talked about TDD, right? And I see that like the value of TDD. We've talked about this. Like it would be amazing to be able to do that because you're writing your tests at the same time you're creating your code, and kind of everything just starts to work in harmony. I think the key there is the developer experience for being successful with that, right? So like right now, let's say I went into Cypress, I did a component test as my TDD, and I run Cypress. Now I'm going to use Cypress to just build out my component, right? And it's refreshing as I make changes, and we're good to go.
Yeah.
The one thing I see that kind of comes into play that I've had, which is the thing that you just did, which you did like the only, right? To only run the one test, right?
Yeah.
Like, do you find people like you should be making a single like file per test? Or like when you combine the multiple tests in the one file, then you have that condition where you're like, I just want to look at the one. So the ergonomics around that, like, is there a pattern or was it something that we could solve to kind of get that TDD experience, people to buy into it?
Sure. So the one thing of so like so like with component testing, the one of the things that makes it different from end to end is like end to end, you would have like an EDE folder and a Cypress folder or something like that, and you would have like a name of a spec. Where component testing, you would have your component test live next to the component itself. So the idea is like, for example, like if I'm working on a project and a new component, maybe I've never touched this piece of code ever in my life, but inevitably I'm going to have to touch a component, right? If you're working in some JavaScript framework. So what I always do is the first thing I do is I just find the component test there, and I can say, okay, I don't even have to run this, and I could say, okay, it's a stepper component. It can increment the count. It can decrement the count. It can clear the count. This is just some additional like tests I wrote, but you get the idea of like, I'm spying on something. So these things basically has some other dependency that it's calling. So the idea is like, I like to put all of the functionality and behavior of a component in this test, because it serves as documentation of what this thing actually does and what it shouldn't do, and what it, it's that way you don't break it. But you're right. And then if you just want to specifically focus on, a couple tests at a time, you can very easily just do
you just
only
add
or something
only
like
to
that.
every single one, or does only
you can
work
just
once?
do this. No, you can do this. We could then side up mount this. Is
there a way to like put tests in groups, so you're like, run group A?
Yeah, so you could describe this and do dot only. Group these.
What?
And then you don't have to, do this.
Oh.
See, I almost start leaning into like putting all my its into their own file, because then while I
Really?
work on it, well, yeah, because like the developer experience, right? I say like, I'm going to go and I'm going to work on this component, and let's say I'm going to work on the clear count, right?
Mhm.
Right now, if I didn't do the only, like all of them would run and I would not see, just like what you had, right? You wouldn't see the clear count one, which is the one that I would be working on, right?
Mhm.
So rather than having to play the dot only game, right? Is there a way to like kind of get things more ergonomic, where it's like, hey, I know I'm going to go make this component clear the count, and that's what I want to work on, and I want to have it running in there, and I just navigate in Cypress to the one I want. And maybe it's a tooling around Cypress itself to select one of them and say, only run this one in the window instead. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I guess there isn't. We don't really have a way other than dot only to accomplish that. We do have this concept of, if you're a Cypress Cloud user, so like when a common thing is like you push a commit and it runs on a PR, and it basically runs and it records in our Cypress Cloud. If a test fails, one of the pain parts is, okay, how do I go find this test that actually failed? So we actually have inside of Cypress Cloud this debug tab, which we're not connected to Cypress Cloud in this project, and it would say, these are the spec files that had failures, and you could go to it and it will just run that one failure. So we do have something like that, but in terms of like, as you're building it like that, yeah, the best way would be I always just like group them into like, for example, clearing. If I want to focus on clearing, I would just group all the tests around clearing into one describe, and then just dot only, essentially to focus on that for this time, because at some point I'm gonna want to know that all of the functionality of this thing works. So
Right.
It's trade-offs both ways. But yeah, you could. It's the Wild West. You could create a new spec for every test if you wanted to. Every it statement. I mean,
so like, if you do that, Justin, how do you run all of them?
They'll show up. Like, see right
they
now,
do. They still show up.
in
Okay.
the spec, you'll just see right now. You see stepper component, right? But you would see one for each, right
I
here,
gotcha.
and you
Okay.
drill into the one, and it would only have one it running for it, right?
Okay.
So then you don't have to worry about the fact that like the order matters of all your its and the one that you want to be focusing on, right? I'm just trying to figure out like, how can we get more people to buy into TDD and be doing it, right? So that's what we're trying to do.
We've got
so much benefit.
Chaos Monster in the chat with a couple of good questions. I've never got a good flow with TDD with UI development for functional or backend stuff. It worked so well. Is there any advice to do TDD with complex UI development? And I think that kind of like ties in maybe with like Shoaib's micro front end. Like, he was asking specifically about best practices with component testing, and said micro front end based solution testing, specifically when you're dealing with different libraries. So I'm hoping we can like address that subject. I know we just touched on it a little bit with Justin's idea of like different files, or Jordan's idea of like, okay, grouping with describes so that you can only that chunk. But are there any other bits that pop up with those questions?
Boy, those are big topics in and of themselves. I mean, I think the two ways we described it are probably the two most like fundamental ways people go about it. I think that but I would say is if you found like every organization does things differently for, good or bad reasons they do it. And so the nice thing is because this is just like it's just written in JavaScript, you can do whatever crazy stuff you want to do. Like you can make it work exactly the way you want. Like for example, like mount is actually basically just a function that we export as part of Cypress. For every framework, there's one for React, there's one, some for Vue and so forth. And then basically, you could basically customize this mount so that it includes, like, for example, you could have different mounts for different parts of your application. So maybe you had like a checkout flow or something. You could have a checkout mount that imports all the things that that flow needs. Maybe it's like a checkout service or a store or a shared module or something like that. This was really beneficial like before standalone, because before standalone, like this depended upon some service, you would have to you could basically like add all these things, but it then became kind of verbose, right? To like import, common module or whatever, all this type of stuff. When you're using standalone, like the component itself basically tells the compiler, hey, this is how you compile in and of itself, which is really, to me, like the biggest win of standalone, is that it makes testing easier. But like I said, you could still create your own mounts that handle, for example, if you're using like NGRX Global Store, instead of configuring that for every single mount, I would just go update your root level mount and say, hey, this is how I configure, provide the store. So every time I mount, it'll always provide this, right? So I guess that's the thing, is don't necessarily focus on what are the best practices necessarily. I mean, I'm not saying don't follow them. And I know Justin doesn't even like that word. He uses, I forget what he calls it.
Successful practices.
Successful practices. But at the end of the day, like the most important thing is you and your team are working on like consistent things, and you're all in agreement on, hey, this is the way we write. We like to write tests, right? I think that's the most important thing.
If you go from, because I know a lot of teams that still have not made the jump to standalone. If you're making that jump, do your tests break? Like if I'm like, module's gone, or do they still work, but you have some cleanup to do just to make it more streamlined? Like, because I'm assuming they would not be pointing to the right things anymore if they were pointing to like a module.
So for example, if you already had component tests and you were, and say stepper component depended upon, I don't know, like had some stepper service, right? Something like this. If you switched to standalone and this was provided in it, it would still mount just fine. It would just be like extra things you provided that we didn't, the test bed wouldn't really need.
But
And
it wouldn't break
Angular
the test.
cleans it up. It wouldn't,
okay.
It wouldn't break it. But you could go in and clean it out. And the other thing I would say, kind of in the same line, is like, if we were to take, say, this whatever stepper component, and you were to unit test this, like the way you would test this would be very it would be very tightly coupled to how you implemented the actual component itself, right? So if you try to test one of these methods or something like that, the implementation details would basically, if you change them in any way, would break your test. Whereas Cypress tries to take the opposite approach, where you're testing the API of your component, so from the outside in. So if you changed increment from using, say, a signal to subject with a service, or a signal store, or an NGRX store, like any of those things, your test would still pass, which I think is really, really valuable, because when you're refactoring, that's when you need your test the most, right? And if your tests break when you refactor, then you're like, it discourages you from refactoring, and then it discourages you, just like, I'm just going to get rid of these tests because they're not even providing any value. So yeah, I think that's the other major thing that I like about it.
A backlog of questions. So I'm gonna they might not flow, but Chaos Monster, does this support IDEs to run specific tests, like with Jest, for example?
Doesn't support IDEs to run specific tests. I'm not really sure what he's
So, like,
asking.
could you go into the sci-ts file and could you run the test directly from that sci-ts file? Like, have it launch Cypress, I think. Or like when you run a Jest test, you could go to that line and say, run this test.
Gotcha. Right. No, but you should be able to in the future at some point. I'll say that. It's not something we have now, but I would just say I've prototyped VS Code extensions that will do this exact same thing. It's not something that we are going to release at the moment, but something that could be there in the future. So.
And then Gary Scott asked, could you share documentation on component testing with Angular internationalization?
Oh, good question. Actually, we don't have any documentation around this, but I've been meaning to do some article around this. So it's a good reminder for Jordan to try to do this. So, so I think it was Gary or whoever that was. Sorry, I don't have that for you, Gary, but I will bug me and I'll try to work on something for you.
I thought I was like the only one that like referred to myself in third person occasionally. It's refreshing. It's good to know I'm not crazy.
That's funny.
Okay, that is the backlog of questions for now. So if you had other tests you wanted to show us or other things.
Yeah, I mean we can write a few more tests. The example of like how once your component is mounted, like we haven't done anything magical. We've just mounted a component, right? But if we wanted to actually implement the description of what we're trying to test here, we want to make sure that you can increment the count. So we could just do something as simple as like I want to get a button. And the nice thing like with end-to-end tests is we recommend using something like a data sci or data test or some type of like data attribute that basically is not used for CSS or for JavaScript. That basically is an identifier that says this is how I access this or select this in an end-to-end test.
So like a testing only identifier?
Exactly.
Like, okay.
Because like if you're using a CSS class, that could change for, legit reasons or
all the time liberally just
delete stuff. Yeah. I've done that, gotten in trouble.
And would have no idea as the more designer person on the front end that these were being used for tests. So absolutely good. I'm loving this idea.
So the idea is like you would use something like, let me just show an example. If you wanted to get this plus button for example, like an end-to-end test, you would do something like this and say like plus button, right? And then what we could do is we could do something like get data sci equals plus button and then dot click. Whoops, I don't know what that is. Dot click. Dot click.
You shall not have a dot today.
Yeah. And so now you click and you can see it's also incremented the count to 1. And then we could do like, I think it's a span that does this and should have text 1. I think this should be right. So there you go. And again, those tests are like running super fast. But what I was getting at before is it's kind of like if you already have these for end-to-end, that's super valuable. But because component tests are they could be much more narrowly scoped, you could do something much easier. Like I want to get a button that contains a plus sign inside of it and click this. And I don't have to make any changes to my actual template or anything like that. And this works. We're like saying I want to get a button that contains whatever, like submit or something, or not submit, or like some type of actionable thing.
God help you if your team changes it to an anchor and they style it like a button.
Exactly. So that's the thing, is like doing component testing like this, it makes it much easier. So this is how you can go about writing tests. We could basically do the inverse here. Yeah, go ahead.
So Jordan, we need a get method, a different get method that knows how to do the data attribute thing, right? So that we can just give it the value.
Yes.
So that way you say like get data, and then you don't have to say like the whole
and then it'll look for sci get or look for sci data or data sci or data test and automatically do it.
Yeah. So then you just do something like this in this command where you would just do cypress.commands.add get sci, and then you do something like I think selector string, and then you just basically do like sci dot get, and then do data sci equals. You have to do the whole
backtick.
This selector type deal, and then you could you would just return this, and that's how you would do this. And then actually recommend this for teams is you're enforcing the same data attribute name, you're enforcing the same like behavior, right? This is one of the things, this is one of the reasons why we recommend using this. So one, you decouple your selectors from the actual styling and logic of your elements, but then you create a custom command that then enforces that behavior. So
I love that. I feel like this is like a very great best practice for
for whoever that was. I forgot your name already. I'm sorry.
Excellent.
Hey,
successful. That is a successful practice.
On the UI, doesn't the UI, the runner for Cypress, like in the UI, provide a way to say suggest something?
Oh yeah, we have this guy. So you could be like, hey, and it'll say, hey, it has a data sci attribute, so it's going to say, hey, it's called this, so copy this. Or in this case, it doesn't have it, so it could do like something like this, which is not that valuable because this could change, or something like clear. So it depends upon several things in your the DOM structure, how it'll actually go about selecting this. But this is always a good starting point.
This tool to start building your tests, because I always imagine you just open this up once you've written them all.
Yes, a lot of people do this. Yeah, exactly.
That is test-driven development. We never define TDD. It's test-driven development.
You could still do TDD, test-driven development, without using the cool interface. You could still, right? Like this interface is just
you need to run the test, right? You need the test runner. So this UI is the test runner, right, for Cypress.
I suppose, but I think you could still write all your tests out first, like because this tool is like providing you like while you're in the middle of the trenches, right? Like, hey, look, there's a better selector, or there's another option.
Oh, I see. You mean the selector tool part of it?
Yeah, I didn't imagine people had them like running and writing and running and writing like at the same time. I just thought you just kind of pop it open when you're ready to run. So that's cool.
Yeah, you could do it both ways. The benefit, like I said, is if you have it running, you're getting like the visual. It's like the dopamine hit of like, hey, you're getting closer. Keep going.
No, Jeff might be pulling you into some shenanigans, Jordan. So watch out.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. He said that I love this topic, and Justin, don't forget we're going to build the AI-driven testing tool, and maybe we should pull Jordan into the venture. So watch out. Jordan.
Whoa, Jeff's just throwing out our shares everywhere. All right, no, but I'm on board with that. We'd have a better product if we added another person. We'll yeah, I agree.
I have a lot of thoughts about this. It's probably not the right time, but yeah.
A lot of thoughts on like AI in general.
Yeah. Well, AI and testing. I think it has very interesting. Well, here's my premise. I don't know if we really want to derail this or not, but
I'm all about the rabbit holes, my friend. Okay. I'll pull us back eventually.
So the idea is like with AI breaks several fundamental principles of testing. One being that if tests aren't like they have to be deterministic, right? Like you have to know that when you run them, that they're going to always give you the same results. The problem with the AI is like you just throw some cues into a black hole and then it brings back something that you don't know for sure, right? You have to create like a really strong model to have expected results back. So it's not that you can overcome that, but it's kind of a fundamental challenge from like a high level point of view. So I think that people will either go one of two routes. They'll either basically lean on AI to write tests, which is the thought I had because initially when I started thinking about this, because people don't like to write tests, so they're like, let's just let the robots do it, right? But then I was like, what if I'm actually wrong, which happens a lot, but what if we actually flipped it the other way and we didn't care what our source code, like the quality of our source code, and we just had really good tests that we wrote, and AI generated the actual code, and we validate that like once, and it forces TDD. Like I write the test, and then I have AI generate the functionality until my test pass.
That is so cruel. You're literally setting up a future where like the only programming that gets like humans get to do is test writing.
Yes,
like,
this
why?
is like for all 10 of us that like testing, this is like a dream scenario, right?
But it makes sense though, because your tests are written by someone hopefully who has less variables than the AI going on, right? So you can be the one managing what's actually being produced. So I've never thought of it that way. That's a cool paradigm shift. I like it. Tips hat.
I'd be a little worried because then I'd have to also tell the AI and don't include like full Lodash and don't go crazy with, and I need an Angular app.
I want it only in
solve a problem, right?
Only in CoffeeScript, just all of it, and it'll be like,
but the thing is, but it's 400 megabytes download, right?
Because at the end of the day, like we're just serving our application. It gets compiled to JavaScript that we can't read anyway. So it's like, what's the difference, right? Like,
yeah, why do we need to read it as long as the tests prove that it is performant and it is functional, right? Like, so
exactly. So it's interesting, like, yeah. So.
Oh man, I love it. I love it. Okay, sorry, we're back. We're back on track. Oof. We've derabbited.
So we've got our UI for component testing, right?
Yes.
And if we needed some, so we're spinning up the application where the Angular build for where this component is going to be used, right? So when you have a component that you're building that you're using in multiple applications, how does that start coming into play in terms of like being comfortable with Cypress deciding which one to use?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely interesting. I would push back a bit and say, like, if you have a component that's used in multiple applications, then the runtime environment should be pretty similar between all of them. Like if they run differently outside of, say, like some injected dependency or something, like there should be consistency, right? And the idea is you could just pick an environment, or for a common example of is generally this is a tool for developers where end-to-end testing could be for QA people or something like that. The other like sort of persona is a design team. So a design team, for example, has maybe a whole build out of, like Kendo UI components or something, right? Like they have a whole build out of components that they want to use, and they know that those components are going to be used by, other libraries or applications. You would want to make sure those components are tested accurately right before they just get released into the wild. So what you would probably do is you would spin up an environment, like the ideal environment, that environment that you would want, that you would feel safe and confident that it would run well in the other applications as best as possible. And that's sort of the approach you would want to take. But it's kind of the same problem you have in general with like, those are going to be used by other applications. So it's like find a runtime environment that is the closest as possible to the end result that the people consuming it.
Makes sense. Yeah, because like let's say this component here is going to use browser animations from Angular, right? And we know browser animations have to be declared at the top level. So then we would need to make sure that when Cypress starts up our Angular app to serve this, that it's doing browser animation inclusion, right?
Yeah, or the thing is like, or you just create your mount that says, hey, I always want browser animations to be part of, when it actually compiles this component. Exactly. Or just this component, if it's just this component that depends upon it. So this is the great part about Angular is like, I was actually having an argument with someone on Twitter about this earlier. I don't know why I was doing this.
You were arguing with someone on Twitter.
But he was like,
life choices.
I don't know. I know. It's a Friday, right?
Yeah, I know.
But like, they were arguing that they didn't like how Angular, the compiler, like basically encapsulates all the magic of creating a Webpack config and all that stuff. But the benefit is like, for stuff like this is like, they do all the heavy lifting of all the stuff, and you just declare the things, a configuration of how you expect the compiler to, render all these things, and it just works. And I think that that's really powerful compared to, other frameworks. You have to have, your own Webpack config or vconfig or things like that, and then like one of the big things is like even from Angular from 16 to 17, adding the new what do you call, like the defer blocks and the how they do the what do they call it, the
flow control?
The flow control stuff.
Yeah.
Like that would completely change, like that would be a breaking change in any other framework. Like if like your Webpack config would have to add like new loaders, like all that stuff would be breaking. But in Angular, like they patch all that for you. So literally going from 16 to 17, like adding support for that was literally nothing. Like we had to do nothing because that's the magic of Angular. So to guy on the internet I was arguing with, just listen to this.
Yeah. I like it.
So with Cypress, we also have the ability to do screenshot testing, right? And video testing. Is that correct? Or just the videos recording?
Yes. But I would say many are still not aware of this, but in Cypress 13, we actually turned those features off by default. So before that, if you have a test that fails at any point, Cypress would automatically take both a video recording of that test failing and a screenshot of that failed test to kind of give you an insight into how it's failing. But in 13, we turned that off because of really two reasons. One is a new feature that we have in Cypress Cloud, which is test replay. And I'll explain that more in a second. But the other thing is the speed. Like the majority of people that would complain about Cypress speed was because it's recording video, like, which is like not exactly a performant task, right? So it's like that becomes they're like, well, this is slow. It's like, it's not really slow. It's the capturing the recording of this, which people like, that's slow. So we shifted, and we actually now, when you use Cypress Cloud, we have something called test replay, and basically we send basically all the recording data of everything in the DOM, and we capture it in basically like a database. And so then we can then in a browser replay everything that happened and do the same sort of functionality of screenshots and recordings, but instead of it being a video that you scrub, it's actual like replaying the test in a browser. So you can go in and actually say, this was the network tab at this point, this was the style, this is what the DOM looked at, that sort of thing, which is was sort of like a performance trade-off. But the benefit of that is actually the thing that I'm working on now at Cypress, which is we can then take the data from your tests, and then tests don't just become a test that gives a signal into whether certain functionality in your application works or not, but the tests end up becoming the data that we can then use to provide much more valuable insight. So for example is I'm working on accessibility at Cypress. So basically, by default, when you're recording, we capture all the data. It's basically like all the DOM of your application. We can then take all the snapshots of DOM, the various states. We can then run an axe report against that and then surface to you, hey, these are the accessibility violations, or these are the parts of your application that aren't tested, or this is the visual parts of your application that are changing, like visual regression. So those are the types of things where the tests, where we're trying to flip it on a paradigm where the tests are not just a test. The tests are basically the vehicle in which you get higher value insight into the overall quality of your application. So
that's cool.
That is cool.
So is there, where I was going with that is there like a visual regression testing as part of Cypress? So am I able to write a test and say, hey, look, I want to make sure that like the UI, the spacing is still the same, and somebody
Can
didn't
we
break
define visual regression?
Yeah, so like right now on the screen, we see the clear button is, 48 pixels below the things. And that's a requirement. And somebody changes something and it makes it, 10 pixels below it. And so can we write testing that ensures that there's no visual regression and those sort of things, right?
So it's only for things like an initial load. It's not like then the user clicks this thing and all of a sudden that padding's gone, or does it
Anything.
include
Any of that, right?
Okay.
Like the ability to say, look, I just want my, regression testing to run to make sure that like if somebody changed a CSS property or value that they broke the visual regression, that if somebody's not humanly looking at it, they don't know, right? Can we automate that?
Yeah. So for example, like at Cypress, we use Percy for visual regression. So what we do is then connect it to basically a Cypress command. So then we do like side up Percy snapshot or something like that. And then we can give it a name that's like button is negative or something like this. And then what it will do is it will then take a snapshot at this point in time. And then in future runs, it will validate that the UI looks the same. The challenge with this, and this is part of what we're working on, is because browsers are asynchronous, they don't always run the same, speed and the same, they don't settle the DOM all at the same time because of factors that are, uncontrollable. You may have some asset that has like a slow load or something like that. And those are the painful parts of tests, right? But the nice thing is because Cypress has like retryability built into it, like we know when the DOM is actually settled, right? So the nice part about the thing that we're working on is like you don't have to declaratively tell it like, hey, take a snapshot here. It will just automatically keep track of snapshots for you. And then it will tell you, hey, between this run and that run, those things changed. So like all this, like the accessibility, UI coverage, visual regression, those types of things, they just work, and it's kind of like magic. Like, wait, how do you do this, right? Because you're not configuring anything, you're not doing anything, you're just running your test, but the tests become the data. So I think that in general, that will be the approach that, and this kind of goes back to the whole AI discussion, is like if tests become the thing that give us a higher level picture of the quality of our application, then we probably I could see a world where we lean more into testing because we can get more valuable insight into them than just like, hey, the code I wrote is correct, right? It could be more valuable than that.
Yeah, totally.
You're saying that it works and it just kind of like it's intuitive and it's smart about when the DOM has loaded. Does that include things like the new control flow with deferred loading, and like if I have a skeleton in and then all of a sudden the full grid pops in or something, like or do I need to make like special qualifications when I know I'm specifically lazy loading in pieces of my template? Like,
yeah, because like, I mean, your application's going to have like, there's going to have animations. There's going to be things that aren't like concrete. So the idea is like we will know like, okay, before this animation occurred, this is what the DOM looks like. And the amount of time it takes to get to that state may vary a little bit. And then we know that the DOM looks like something else after that thing loads in, or after this section was deferred, and we can infer based upon like those different things, like, hey, basically connect the dots between like one run and the next, which it's not an easy task. That's a very challenging problem that we're trying to solve. But the idea is it can be done, and that's the thing that I know we're really excited about in terms of.
I just didn't know if there was like an additional like flag that Cypress had that was like, hey, watch out, this guy is gonna like only load on scroll or whatever the thing is, right?
Yeah. No, but I will say for component testing doesn't know if something's deferred or anything
with just the component.
So actually, shameless plug, just wrote an article about how to do this with component testing. And basically the way Angular does it in their test bed, they expose basically like a defer part of their testing block. And you basically say, hey, I now want to trigger defer loading, defer complete, or something like that. And you can basically trigger that and then test those cases as well. So those you can easily do. Cool. And that's the thing of it, because it's built upon testing bed. As Angular adds additional features, it will just continue to work because we're wrapping that for you.
Would it make sense to ever take something like that deferred, like in this case, it'd be like we're deferring our stubber loading or whatever. Would it ever make sense to take defer like up a level and be like, I want to make a test that just tests all of our components in case they were deferred? Like, does XYZ happen? Like, or no, because then that's not component testing and you're breaking your entire flow. So it needs to be like individual, like it's on each component.
Yeah, you definitely could do that. And I could see the use case for that. Here is, let me just show this example. Yeah. So like, here's an example that I use. And basically, like I have this one where it's like, hey, I want to have something inside of the defer block. I want to defer after a certain amount of time. And then like based upon some condition, and this is outside the defer block. If you just try to mount this, it's going to ignore the defer parts. It's just going to show the outside defer like thing. That made it even smaller. That's not a plus. It's like, I want to magnify this by zooming out for you real quick.
Yeah, it was good.
So you could create, how we did this earlier, you could create like custom commands that then grab those things. And so I created like two defer and a render command. And then this is the implementation of it. And then in your test, you could do something like, take this component, I want to defer it, and then I want to render it in the complete state, and then I get outside defer and inside defer. So you could create a mount that does this by default, that defers all the things, and you could test it like that too.
Cool. So that's awesome.
That's awesome.
Oh my gosh, we're at the top of the hour. Yeah. I'm sorry, guys. So, I did not even do we have things we want to ask real quick? Yeah.
Right. I know we're at the top of the hour. I want to lay down a teaser, and we need to make up not having you on the show for a while, Jordan. We got to get you on another
episode.
Okay.
So, yeah. So a little teaser. Like a while back, I believe you put out a tweet or Zed, whatever they're called now, that talked about you could use component testing to test services and be able to like mock endpoint calls and just test your services. I think that'd be a fascinating episode to really dive into.
You want to come on in February?
Or yeah, we could do it. That could be fun.
That makes me so happy.
So yeah, it is a somewhat work in progress concept, because the thing that makes Cypress great is that you can see it, but it's hard to visualize a service, right? You can't see it, but I could see, I want to create a UI and a plugin around that does this, but I have an example, and we can definitely work through it, because
apparently
cool.
I have so many questions that you don't even get to both of your demos. So I think we'll be great on content.
But you can also run Cypress headless, right? So I think that's where then that sort of story happens, is that you just run it headless and get an answer.
Yeah, exactly. Because that was the main thing, is like, people that say, hey, I believe in component testing, I love, like, I'm on board, but like, hey, I have unit tests for my services, like, what do I do? The idea is like, you could, you could just you don't want to manage more tools than you need to. So it's like if I could get rid of, and Karma I think is already like they deprecated it or something. I saw recently, or maybe using Jest or whatever, where you could basically just use this Cypress to unit test, because you could unit test it. You're just not going to get the UI magic stuff that you would get, but you wouldn't get it anyways if you're unit testing it. So.
Oh, excellent. I will bother you off air
Throw it on the calendar.
About booking. Yes. Okay. Do you guys, Justin, Jordan, have picks before we wrap with a word from our sponsors? Anything this week, last week that was really cool in your life? My pick is Dimension 20 Fantasy High. You can watch it on YouTube. Killer D&D series. It sounds so boring, but if you love fantasy and like maybe have played D&D before, and you're like, yeah, that's pretty cool. Like, it's the people I found out recently are like actually professional like actors, like they're in that industry. So I was like, gosh, when I role play, I'm not this good. Like, and then I find out, that's why they're professionals. It's fine. So, but definitely worth a watch if you're bored and on an airplane for 20 hours and want to binge it. Nice. You guys, anything you?
All right, so Jordan, I got to ask: are those the Apple headphones?
They are.
And how do you like them? I want to know. I need a report because everybody's wearing them. All famous people are wearing them. So
and you're wearing them with glasses. Wow. Yeah.
No, I do love them. I have big ears, so they actually fit around my big ears, which is great. I wear them on airplanes because that's one of the main reasons I got it, and it it completely silences almost. It takes like the volume to like 10%, which is like so nice if you're just trying to like, you don't want it, for like 10 hours, right? Yeah. So like that's really nice. I like cut the grass with it, and it goes like you hear nothing. It's so wild, dude. Like
it's funny you say that because they look like earphones massive, wear for cutting the grass, right? Yeah. They're a little big, so I'm like, I don't know, do I want to buy into this? This is a big headset on my head.
Are they bigger than the Bose? Like, are they bigger than?
Oh yeah, they're huge.
Really?
But they work. The other thing is they have a transparency mode, so like you could just tap a button and it's just like you can hear someone just like they're talking and you don't have them on. So it's really cool.
Oh, that's right. It's like it's like almost like using it as like a little mini mic, right? Like it's like pointing it through. So not just turning off, it's silencing, but it's like
that's exactly what it has. It has a mic that turns it on. So they're crazy expensive.
I wonder if I should get them for my mother-in-law. Like so she can like
you could mute her. Is that what you're saying?
No, so she could live in transparency mode and actually hear us. Yes.
No, I thought you meant you wanted to get them so you could mute your mother-in-law. I thought that's what you were trying to say.
We both shall have.
We're gonna get them.
Excellent. Okay, I'm gonna go. Well, so I also have this problem where I can't wear earrings because it's not big enough space. So you saying they're a little bit bigger makes me really want to go and see if they're big enough to not squash the lobe. So. Excellent.
Yeah, or you could just change your earrings out. I mean, that's
for heaven's sake,
save like
Justin.
$300, but whatever.
I know, but like I'm very much like a all or nothing. So at any point during the day, I have to take off my earrings. They're just never going to go on, right? Like it's like, what's the point? What's the point in life?
What's the point?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you like them though. That's really cool. What about you, Justin? Do you have any picks? Anything you're like?
That's my pick. You
can't make his headphones your pick.
I was gonna say this is that feels. I don't even know how to say.
That's a first. Jordan, is there anything in Justin's office? That
I really love that hat you're wearing. No, I would say
my Ahsoka hat. My wife got me this, found it on Etsy, so it's Ahsoka's logo from Star Wars.
Nice. No, I would say my pick would be. I'm not sure if you guys. Know who this is, but I like a week or two ago, I took my wife. We went to see Nate Bargatze, the comedian. Super funny. So if you like comedy, he's super clean. Just like a fun time. Like if you've never like done anything like that, and I'd never been to like a comedy show or anything like that, like super recommend it. Like,
do they tour? Like, is that
he sold out. Like he's selling out like basketball stadiums like 2 nights in a row. He's like he was just on like Saturday Night Live. Like he's super hot right now in entertainment, I guess.
Nice.
So what the kids tell me. So
That's what the kids tell you. I didn't tell you, Justin. Zach surprised me and got me tickets to see Blink-182 because they're touring again
Oh,
right now.
nice.
I lost it. Like if there is a band, like you just had to have a band that you could only ever play their music, that would be my life's anthem. So I was like, but what if they don't live up to the hype? I can't handle it.
I got to see them at BlizzCon, so that was a double win. Yeah.
Did they sound good in person? Like,
Oh yeah.
Oh, thank God. I don't know.
You're really worried about that, aren't you?
I've met a couple idols in the past, not rock stars, like just people I have like, and like in person, they like just like flat on the face. And so I'm just like, my husband and I have this saying in our family, never meet your idols. So I'm like, ooh, but Justin says they're fine. It's going to be fine. It's going to be great. Excellent. And what was the name again of, you said Bargatze?
Nate Bargatze.
Bargatze. Okay. I'm going to look it up because I need to see if they're going to be touring around in
I'm sure he definitely will, but he has a couple Netflix specials. Cool. So yeah, it's good. Just listen to him. Like you could watch it with your kids. Like it's super clean. It's super fun. So
that honestly is, you cannot watch Dimension 20 with your kids.
Probably.
This is there's too many cuss words. Don't even try it. You think you're fine for a good 30 minutes and then you're like, wah! So no, don't try it. Don't try it.
But you can wear the headphones around your kids.
Oh, there you go.
That's another plus too, right?
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
Brought it right back.
Justin's like the home man. He's like the opposite of a bouncer. Instead of like kicking people out, he like brings them in. You know,
bring everybody in. That's interesting.
The ouncer.
I like that.
We're gonna find out whatever the opposite of a bouncer is.
Don't hire me for tension. Hire me for hugs.
Retention.
Retention. Oh, well,
actually, have a retention pass. We'll
Jordan, I'm dead serious. I'm gonna bother you about that episode February or March, sometime in the spring winter sessions. But thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us today. It was so much
super fun.
Yes. All right. Well, we are signing off, everybody. Thank you, chat. You were beautiful. Mwah! Have a wonderful Friday, and we'll see you next time. Angular Air is sponsored by Kendo UI for Angular. We have over 100 components built from the ground up in Angular or each framework and library that it's built for. So not only do we have Angular on the JavaScript side, but we have Kendo UI for React, jQuery, and Vue as well. And if you're on the .NET side of life, we have things for Blazor, Maui, WPF, and so much more. All of our libraries are themable, customizable, and of course come with killer professional support. So try it out for free today at kendoui.com.